And I think there's nothing more powerful than being in the presence of someone who's highly regulated. But that regulation takes being connected at a very deep level with myself. And so I guess that's part of the framing that I encourage my leaders to explore with me. It's difficult because it can feel conceptual when we're not connected with ourselves. And it can feel like in some sort of utopian ideal when we're not. Or it can feel a bit weird. Why? I'm paid to do a job. I'm paid to ensure that our profitability and our growth and our purpose is fulfilled, not to be connected with myself and to know, how I show up and the impact that has. So I think a lot of it is about grounding it in their own reality.
Well, you're in for a big treat today on Evolve. We have a guest from the UK. Her name is Samreen McGregor. Now, she's an executive coach. She's got, over 25 years of experience. She's the founder of Turmeric, and she wrote a book called Leader Awakened. When I read that book, I felt like I was looking in the mirror. I felt seen, I felt heard, and to be honest, I thought, wow, she has articulated this notion of conscious leadership in such a beautiful way. Very accessible, and also has some great evidence to back it up. So I'm really excited to have Samreen on the show today. We are going to talk about really what does it mean to be a leader awakened, and how does that integrate with trauma-informed leadership. Samreen has a very unique ability to create conditions for leaders to help them stretch beyond their existing capabilities. And so we're going to hear about her insight, her experience, and her beautiful integration between business performance, behavioral change, and embodied consciousness. I'm really excited for you to hear the rest of this conversation between Samreen and I. Hope you enjoy. I'm so excited to welcome you to the show, Samreen. Welcome to Evolve.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here today.
Yeah. Now, Samreen, I know that you and I, this is our first time meeting, and your PR team reached out to me and told me about this book called Leader Awakened, and I went through it. I was about 2 pages in. I'm like, oh my gosh, Samreen and I need to talk and connect. So I'd love to talk about your book, Leader Awakened, and how it came to be, and how you put all those wonderful things into practice in your business. How does that sound?
Sounds lovely. Really, really great opportunity to talk to someone who by the sounds of it, I think we were in 2 different parallel universes experiencing similar things or learning similar things. So would love that.
So, Samreen, why don't we start off? What inspired you to write Leader Awaken? Maybe some of the events in your life that led up to it, and then we can get into all the juiciness that you put in that book.
So, gosh, it's a lovely question, because I do feel that I've written many things throughout my life. I've actually contributed chapters, and I've written articles, and I've also written theoretical content, but this one felt really different. And it felt different, especially because the idea to write it landed in a moment in my life where I was trying to figure things out. I wasn't sure where I'd come from, where I was going next. I knew what had happened, but I was trying to make sense of it all. And that cut across my professional life. And I start there because it was probably one of the immediate needs that I was trying to fulfill by writing a book. But then there was a very clear acknowledgement and realization that it doesn't sit in isolation, that it was very much sitting interwoven with, I was going to say side by side, but actually interwoven with the life experience that I'd had in the previous 2-3 years. So it was in 2020, I come up with the idea. And it was 3 years exactly after my son, who at the time was 9 years old and was diagnosed with a brain tumor, and a cancerous brain tumor. And this was at a time where I had my whole work life. Yes, sorry. It's interesting when you tell the story, and, in that sort of connection with you, which I'm very aware and appreciate that we share. But we do sometimes tell the story and just disconnect from the reality of what I've just said to you. So thank you for sort of, just outwardly expressing that. And at that moment, I guess life was good. It seemed simple. I had, a couple of years order book, a business I'd set up, and it had taken me a few years and I'm an entrepreneur. I do executive coaching with individuals and teams. Before that, I'd worked in financial services and then as a consultant. And I was really happy, and things just seemed to be really straightforward, even though, clearly as a mother, there's number of things that
never that straightforward.
But relatively, it was straightforward, wasn't it? And yeah, we had, and I say we because it was my whole family. It was the ecosystem of the people who I knew and who were in my life at the time. And yeah, it was a major disruption. And that was 3 years before I decided to write this book. So clearly there was a period of time where we went through a journey, and I certainly went through a journey. I lost myself, had to rediscover myself in lots of different ways and lots of connotations and domains. And then this one day I thought, do you know what? I really feel like I want to write a book. It serves a particular purpose in helping me to market and become more selective about the kind of work I want to do. Because as you can imagine, those 3-4 years have shifted quite a lot of what I do and why I do it. And yeah, I hadn't realized, and a bit like you, because I've been listening to parts of your book, actually, it was very important for me to use myself as an instrument to inspire others, but also to help others to see the importance of this kind of work, but to do it in a really vulnerable and open way. And so that was probably enough of the context around why and when.
Thank you for sharing all that. I think the context is important. And, I really resonated when you paused there for a second and said, oh, right, the shock of hearing that story about, your son. I've experienced a similar reaction where when I share, just sort of the headline of my story, and I just gloss right on and move, and people are like, oh, how did you do it? I'm like, yeah, no problem. We're all good now. Let's move on. So I just had a moment with you there where I was like, oh, I do the same thing. I just kind of move on, thinking come on with me. And I've learned just the importance of stopping to acknowledge that and to be with someone else in that. So again, I think we just kind of are coming at this through a similar lens. Samreen, there was a quote early in your book that there was a few of them, but I'm going to start with this one. Ambition comes at a cost, especially when what lies behind overachievement remains hidden. Ambition also has its shadow, and in many workplaces, it is a habit that can be ruthlessly encouraged and exploited. Those are some I haven't heard it articulated in a succinct way like that. And I'm sure many people listening to this really grapple with ambition and it's good. And is there really a cost ? How did you find just such beautiful ways to put that together and then to lead the reader into the book to describe awakening? Because that's not really a corporate word, like awakening, right?
No, nice spot there. And it took me so long to find the right word, the awakening word. But let's come back first to the first part of your question, because I'm so touched that you've picked that up. It's probably one of the most important. And actually, I didn't articulate that until after I finished writing the book. So it's really interesting that you've picked that up. When you've written the book and then other things start to come and clarity starts to show itself. And that sentence, and I think that whole page really emerged for me in a super clear way after I'd reread my book about 100 times and iterated and edited. And so I do think that it's important to recognize that. And it comes through pain. It comes through.
It does.
And I think many of us, I think you, again, I keep sort of assuming for you, but I do think those really dark moments where we realize that for good reason and for very genuine and needed reasons, we push ourselves. And, if we didn't, as human beings, if we didn't, adapt as creatures on this planet that wanted to thrive and strive and push ourselves, then we wouldn't be progressing. There's clearly a need for that in our ability to progress, to evolve. But equally, I think for me personally, the day, I think I was sitting in my kitchen with a puppy. We'd just gotten a puppy. We'd come back from Boston. The kids were finally back at school. My husband, who works for a big corporate, actually was sort of trying to, reintegrate and reestablish his reputation and inner reputation and credibility in a work context after having taken a sabbatical to be with our son. And I was sitting there going, what am I going to do? I'm broken. I don't know how I'm going to operate again as a professional. And then I realized just over a period of weeks and months just how ambitious I was and how driven I was and how shameful it felt that I felt like a real failure. I thought, why can't I just pick myself back up again? And I did have, by the way, I had some incredible clients who were so supportive, who said to me, months before rather, invoice us now, do the work when you get back. It'll give you something to do. And, in the meantime, any projects that require your support, if you could, refer others or we could find different ways of doing it internally. And then there's another aspect to it, which is my work with my clients. And I have seen many, many clients, and having also worked in a corporate environment more recently, particularly during the pandemic, I've witnessed and been present with a lot of people who do give their souls, who do have an intertwined sense of identity when it comes to the professional and personal and real self. And in a corporate context or in an organizational context, I witness and work with a lot of people who give up a lot and not question it. And they don't question it and they don't realize, and I've done this myself, by the way, what is this all for? And even after the journey I'd been on with my son and his cancer and my daughter's trauma, and all of our trauma.
Well, and that's what I wanted to ask, because you talked about ambition having a shadow. And by the way, I loved how you started the chapters, beaming a light to awaken you. It was beautiful. Is, when you step back, like, does the ambition side, the shadow side of the ambition, is that where we have to acknowledge our relationship with trauma?
Oh, great question. So before I come to trauma itself, I think, like any context, the aspect of the shadow to me carries a number of different connotations, and I think they're all relevant and they're all valid. One of the aspects, or one of the elements I see in the aspect of the shadow, is the dark one, is the one that's undesirable. And, as personalities, as people, as humans, we carry some of those negative elements in our shadows. But there's another one that I think that's really important, which is the unknown. It's the one that we don't see. We might feel, and sometimes the feelings are a reflection of deep unconscious factors. And that, for me, is a part of the aspect of the shadow that I think we don't speak enough about or explore enough. We do, I think we might do in therapy, but we don't tend to use it as an opportunity to shine a light and learn from. And let me just come back to ambition. And I think personally, and you will have read this in the book, I talk a lot about the shadow of my ambition, the intergenerational impact of my parents. My father, an incredible man, who eldest son of a Muslim family growing up in Agra in India, and goes to engineering college and then gets a full scholarship to take a boat over to California and study at Stanford and do his master's, and then eventually does his PhD there. This is in the 1950s, this is right before the partition, and it actually a fairly, not a poor family, but, a family that's very, very stretched. And his mother didn't work, obviously, and his father did, but it was a huge family. So they were not well-to-do. And then they had to move and migrate to Pakistan. And then my mother which is an incredibly inspirational story for me personally as a woman. And my ambition has certainly got its roots in this. The eldest daughter in a family of 9 brothers and sisters as well, and Catholic, growing up in the Andes Mountains in Venezuela. And her father was not at all encouraging of her studying, but she was 100% not, fully determined, not taking no for an answer. And her mother did support her. Eventually, she studied, progressed her studies, and found that there was a gap in students who wanted or knew anything about studying statistics. So she joined this very small group of mainly male students and applied and got a master's full-time scholarship to go to Stanford. And that's where she met my dad. Didn't speak a word of English. So you see these stories, this intergenerational story for me, which I, again, until I wrote the book, if I'm honest, having done a lot of, therapy work in my lifetime, I hadn't put 2 and 2 together. When you write, you suddenly start to realize certain things start to match. And that was did that happen for you?
Yeah, well, I said it was therapy writing this book. My book started out actually as a letter. It was called The Perfect Widow. And it was a letter to my boys about how I tried to raise them after their dad died. And I submitted the 60,000 words to the publisher and then realized, oh my gosh, this is a hot mess for a whole lot of reasons. And a really dear friend, a coach of mine, asked me some really helpful questions that made me realize there was more in there that could serve the audience that I'd been working with for years. And from there, it evolved. That's how the title came. It evolved into, what does this look like in the workplace? And I wasn't going to put the word trauma in the title, right? So I've called it The Path to Trauma-Informed Leadership. And I really thought about that word carefully. And then I wanted to be very explicit with it, which was different. Like, I appreciated the subtleties of your book, that you didn't put the word front and center, but in fact, you're working at it and it's at the core of everything. And for me, I thought, I'm just going to be bold and throw it out there. Because as somebody who worked in a corporate environment for over 20 years, I was like, that word, that doesn't apply to me. And so I felt that, my book could help complement, a book like yours, although I hadn't seen yours at the time, to really help come at it from different angles, right? I think we all need to hear it in different ways. So I was just really taken. I didn't realize there was a shadow to the work side of things.
Yeah. And well, look, Carolyn, you've said a few things there that I just to respond rather than to, but I had a lot of dilemmas around the use of the terminology around trauma in the title, even in the book. And part of the reason, you've just described it beautifully, but part of the reason is because I think the existence of trauma, although it is very much here and real, it carries connotations and it carries associations that as you know this already, we both know this, that tends to sort of trigger a shutdown or a barrier or a rejection. I was having a conversation with just a colleague of mine who I know very well recently, and I made mention of dissociation in a number of generic contexts, and then we started getting into it with him. And I had the shutdown. And this is someone who I've worked with for a long time and who even loves the content of the book and has loved learning from me. But I can see that reaction. It's such a natural reaction. And I really appreciate that you've put, and it's interesting because that language, I noticed it when I saw your book and the title of it and also the structure and the construct of it. And it's lovely the way you said they complement each other, because one's more of a self-reflective inner, another is actually naming and really, really bringing some concretization to it, which I think together they're a wonderful complement to each other. But it is a gentle road, isn't it? It's a very, very soft and gentle road for many.
Yeah. Yeah. And awakening, how did you get to that word? And like, let's talk a little bit for people that maybe are listening. like, oh, awakening. Oh, I don't have time to awaken. I got too many things to do. So, therein lies
Yeah.
like that shadow. So I'd love to hear a little bit about like how you work with clients to help guide them into this next stage. We won't even use the big A word, but like into this sort of next stage of leadership where they do awaken to some other things that they might not have known about themselves.
Yeah, a really, really important consideration, I would say, given what we've just said about barriers and perhaps a less conscious understanding of the importance of some of this work. And I won't say the A word, but so I'll answer both questions. The first one was when I was trying to come up with a title, and I was into this: should we be using trauma? Should we not? All of this stuff, and then something in the middle. And actually, I was talking to someone who helped me also with the cover of the book and the imagery, and I started speaking about what it felt like at a particular phase, which is actually it features in chapter 6 of when I came back, and I've referenced it today in this conversation as well, and was trying to find myself. And I used the word awakening. I said it was a bit like I've been awakened. And as we were talking, and I was telling this story, and actually it wasn't even a direct, interpretation in any way. And he said, "Yeah, that's that word you've just used. Do you notice the word you just used?" I said, "No, what word did I use?" And then he said it. I went, "Oh, that's exactly what I do with my clients. That's exactly." And in fact, if I'm using myself as an instrument, there's a parallel process going on here, and so perhaps there's something here. So that was where that word came from. But I think that you mentioned something really important here, and quite challenging. And I picked it up again. This is one of the things that I get sort of interlaced after having finished writing most of the book. And it's the concept that many of us, and perhaps I noticed this after my son's illness and all the changes that we made as a family, and I made as a woman, is that we do sleepwalk through life a lot of the time because we're so busy.
Yes.
Because we're so caught up in a rhythm. Yeah. Because despite really clear intentions to notice the patterns of our life, the choices we make, the mistakes we make, and even the disgruntlement, when we're not happy. And I know I often have a conversation with my husband, more so recently, actually, in the last couple of years, where I go, God, I'm not feeling happy. I'm not feeling fulfilled, but everything's going well. What's going on? Why is that happening? And typically it's because I haven't stopped to notice the patterns. And one of the things that I've been doing very, very, quite actually very disciplined way is I've been trying to do embodied work. So embodied yoga or embodied, mindful activities like breathwork. And yeah, which is, goodness, hasn't it been, it's certainly been revolutionary for me. It's not easy. It takes a bit of patience and, when we're ambitious, we need to slow down and stop striving. So that's not an easy process to go through.
Let's just stop and appreciate that for a second, because this morning it's a struggle every day. I feel like there is just old patterns. I don't want to say resistance, but in a way there is resistance. But, I joined a group this morning at 8 a.m. to do 20 minutes of breathing and practice. She calls it a practice. So we're tuning in for 20 minutes of practice, which helps me make it seem like a sport, if I'm being honest, because I grew up, being sporty and that sort of thing. And so it helps me take sort of the woo-woo out of it. And then I did 10 minutes of somatic exercises, and really learning to get into to feel my body versus, and you've used this word already, Samreen, as an instrument. So I had another podcast guest recently. She's a professor in San Diego, and she used the saying, use your body as an instrument, not an ornament. And so when I'm doing these embodied practices, I'm really focusing on instrument, not ornament. Like, my body's not an ornament to carry my head around and use all these great things. And so that was the other piece again in the book. I'm like, oh my gosh, Samreen and I feel like it's a mother, a sister from another mister, or whatever, however that saying goes. But that's really hard to get into our body and find that embodiment.
It is. I really love the way you're noticing the connection between how you get motivated or you have been motivated throughout your life, and sport being a particular piece there. But I think having to find ways of recreating that in a new practice is it just like anything. I mean, I think if either of us were to go and study aeronautical engineering, we'd have to relearn and we'd have to let go, and and that just takes time. But I think from an embodied perspective, it's even tougher, because in my experience, and certainly through my studies and my research and my work with people, our bias to focus much more on our cognitive capacities and thinking is far higher. So having to do something that helps us see and think and analyze and work out, but feel at a very deep level, and doing that thing in synchronicity is that's in its own right is a whole new capability that I think we're just starting to learn in the Western world. Eastern cultures have been doing this kind of stuff for a long time. And, I'm embarrassed to say I'm half Indian, and I haven't actually, I mean, I have meditated, but I haven't adopted some of those very sophisticated, although they wouldn't say it's sophisticated, practices. And one thing, I am going to share this because, she's amazing. So I joined similar to you, but it's a yoga. It's a very embodied. Actually, she's also a trauma specialist. I learned later. I didn't even realize she did this. But so she helps us in our yoga she reads beautiful poems and pieces by Mark Nepo. I don't know whether you've read this wonderful book. It's called Finding Inner Courage. And she reads these while we're in a very difficult, painful, quite resistant posture, trying to align ourselves and notice the transition that we're making. So she's connecting some of the cognitive ability, because let's face it, that's what we've been trained to do through our schooling. And she's helping us to push ourselves in ways. But interestingly, a very good example is when I'm in a position where I'm really struggling, mainly because of bad habitual posture or habits of how I hold my hips or whatever it might be. She's bringing to the conscious when we're striving and when we're allowing. So in that moment, we're having to reflect on the micro process of being ambitious and striving versus allowing and letting go whilst we're experiencing the sensation. It's extraordinary.
So, can I ask a question about yoga? Since we're talking about embodied practices, I have never found any joy, any desire to do yoga at all. Zero. And I do think that it has everything to do with the fact that I cut my body off from my head, and my ability to go into those positions or find any sort of comfort or relief in it was directly related to the amount of trauma, unresolved trauma that I was carrying. So here's a hypothesis, because I still don't do yoga, by the way. Like that group that I join, it's Lynn Fraser. She's amazing. It's very much learning how to feel things in your body. So just learning how to attune and recognize signs in your body. It's kind of like literacy, like basic literacy. I'm learning like the ABCs. And then I have this other app that I use to help me do some stretches that they haven't called it yoga. I'm going to guess that it is yoga, but because they're called somatic exercises and it's just a lot more gentle, I had this aha this morning. I thought, oh, maybe I could do yoga. So here's my question for you, because it sounds like you've done yoga. Can people do yoga for just the sake of doing it, to say, check, 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 I've done it? And like, is there a difference between that and like truly embodying what yoga is meant to be?
Wow, what a question, Karen. What a question. So, and I love it. Like that, very, very, very cool. So look, there's a couple of things I want to say. One thing is this. I want to empathize with you first about not enjoying yoga. And the reason why I want to empathize with you about that first, and that will frame my answer, is because, interestingly, whenever I tried yoga, I felt unfulfilled because over the years, my whole goal with doing any exercise or sport was about achievement. And I found
Yes.
it really hard to achieve some of these things. It was really driving me up the wall. I remember doing this, I can't remember what it's called, this pigeon pose thing. And everybody else was able to do it. And I felt like a complete and utter loser because I couldn't do it. And I thought, why can I not do this? And I've worked hard enough. I've done it now for 3 months and I still can't do this. And with other sports and other things, I've got a measure and I could tend, and particularly me, because I am a total adrenaline junkie when it comes to being in in any type of exercise. And I do strength training, I do weightlifting. I've got very clear measures as to how much I'm lifting, and equally with my running. So I just want to empathize with that, because I think actually that was the moment I disconnected achievement from my practice of yoga and why I'm doing it. Everything changed. And I'm going to be really honest with you, it literally changed in the last year. And the reason why it changed, and there's a really, really evidence-based reason for this, is I've always struggled with my weight. I'm sort of half Venezuelan. I'm not sort of, I am half Venezuelan. And my family, my mum's family, has always had a sort of genetic predisposition with weight. I'm extremely healthy. Can you imagine with what we've gone through as a family? We avoid sugar, we
Yeah.
avoid gluten, dairy. We have incredibly nutritious, and my son's actually become quite an avid cook. But I really struggled. And now I'm going through perimenopause. I've just been diagnosed again with thyroid, subclinical, and I'm going through perimenopause. And then I've also got high adrenal load. So very high stress levels. And again, that goes hand in hand with my ambition. Still there, by the way. So anyway, long story short, over the last couple of years, I was at a gym and I was driving myself to the ground, at times doing two workouts a day, 5, 6 a week. I was on some sort of Olympic competition with various other people and got incredibly competitive. And I think that's what's brought about some of my autoimmune disease again. It's because it's an additional stressor. The day I realized that actually I have been, and by the way, this has been in parallel to writing my book. So even though I've been talking about all this stuff, I hadn't even realized that the exercise I was doing was actually going against everything I was, really talking about. So the moment I realized this is slightly fraudulent what I'm doing here, I need to change something. And that's when yoga came into my life properly, because before they've been failed attempts. So I want to come back to your question, which is, can you do the tick, 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 tick? Personally, I think that's what I was doing. And like 5, 6 years ago. And it wasn't doing anything for me. And in fact, it was just frustrating me. And I was using a completely disconnected set of measures for the value I was getting out of it, and B, how much fulfillment and happiness I was getting, or joy I was getting from it. Now, when I do yoga, it's happened a few times recently. I mean, you would find this fascinating, but it triggers a lot of emotion. It's happened twice now. I've literally cried out of not even feeling anything. It's just pent up traumatic memory coming out of my body, which has been quite surprising, actually. And it's encouraging me to slow down, and it's encouraging me to really take the space and time. And just to finish that up, one of the commitments I've made with myself is 2 mornings a week. I go to this special yoga studio, which is in the middle of the woods, not far from here, but it's about 20 minutes drive. There's no phone reception anywhere. So I can't be looking at emails or text messages. I literally go into the yoga studio, hour and a half, and I'm back here by 11:30. So every Monday morning and every Friday morning, it's my practice.
Wow. That's going to be question number 2. You've just answered question number 2 when we end off the podcast. You're really, like, this conversation is really, I think, bringing to life what it means to live with our body, or sort of have our body as an appendage, versus living within our body.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me is such a transformative way of looking at leadership. that the leaders who can live within their body are by far and away the leaders that we need in this world, in this, like, in every aspect of life. And I'm curious what strategies or what things you do with your clients that help them, because in essence, when we live within our bodies, we are going to send signals to everyone around us that we're calm, we're grounded, telling the other person's brain, hey, we're safe. What strategies do you use with your clients, or what work do you do with your clients to help them embody this work?
Yeah, and I think I really appreciate the question, and I think it's such an important question at this moment in time. The world we live in is full of volatility, uncertainty, and those who we lead and who we have a disproportionate impact on as leaders are very affected at a very micro level by how regulated we are. So I couldn't appreciate this question more strongly. And I think there's nothing more powerful than being in the presence of someone who's highly regulated. But that regulation takes being connected at a very deep level with myself. And so I guess that's part of the framing that I encourage my leaders to explore with me. It's difficult because it can feel conceptual when we're not connected with ourselves, and it can feel like in some sort of utopian ideal when we're not, or it can feel a bit weird. Why? I'm paid to do a job. I'm paid to ensure that our profitability and our growth and our purpose is fulfilled, not to be connected with myself and to know how I show up and the impact that has. So I think a lot of it is about grounding it in their own reality. It's less difficult these days because so many of my clients tend to be either rushed off their feet, actually living with compromises and finding it very painful.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but I'm also hearing more and more. I mean, you and I are two examples, but of leaders or clients themselves or the loved ones and their health being impacted. And it isn't that difficult to start to correlate or at least find some level of causality in the research actually around what does having high levels of cortisol streaming through our bodies that are only designed to carry that load when we're stressed. But when we're chronically stressed, that cortisol is actually damaging tissues and damaging our immune systems and bringing on autoimmune diseases or damaging, our organs. And it becomes quite an easy conversation to have with someone when they start to see those connections. But that's the why. That's the, I think the coming back to what we were just talking about is the embodied answer, which is, really getting a sense of what's going on for them, what's current, what's relevant, what's in the moment. And often, in my experience, when we start getting into some of the dilemmas that they're experiencing, some of the undesirable effects that they're living with, it's taking those little things bit by bit and helping them to make sense of and resource them with what to do. So there's a really great example of a client. Actually, I mentioned this one in the book, and something recent happened with a different client. But I just think this other one it was so palpable. It was brilliant, but not in equal measures. Extremely fit, young, driven, highly respected board member of a large multi-billion-pound Dutch business, but global business. And he started getting a sort of paralytic effect on his face. And he obviously went and tried to get this checked, and it kept recurring, and he didn't get an immediate diagnosis, but in the end it was a result. It was a effect of stress. So they said, look, you're going to just have to stop completely, do nothing for weeks, which for someone like that who's almost addicted to the activity and those hits of getting things done and making an impact and being rewarded for it. Well, and then so that was when I started working with him, and he was someone that we had to look at various domains in his life that were impacted by him being ill and not well in the moment, but then what would that look like over time, and importantly how that would impact his passion, which is the work he did. He loved it. So finding a way to coexist and actually do it in a way that's regulated, that's monitored, and where he has agency and he can make choices, rather than coming back to the sleepwalking through life, where he's able to really impart some choices and values. It became part of the contract. And interestingly, he's been promoted since. He's now moved into one of the main businesses rather than the parent business. He's got an even bigger role, but he regulates that and manages it in a way that's far more choiceful and agentic.
I can so relate with that. I mean, there's so much in what you said there. Is sleepwalking or sleep running or sleep speed running, speed walking. We think we're in control. And I know I did this for several years, thought I was in control. And when I was approached, it was my mom actually who started the intervention. And I still remember where I was in that moment. And she said, you don't know what's going on around you. And this was about 4 years into Paul's illness. So the boys were like, 2 and 3, maybe 3 and 4. And no, 2 and 3. I was like, I know exactly what's going on around me. And my resistance, my defiance to that statement was so strong and powerful. And I look back and I think, oh, whoa, like, hello, like red flag. That was a red flag. And, the boys tell me, they're like, Mom, do you remember when we used to jump on the refrigerator and the nanny couldn't get us down? And I was like, no. They're like, yeah, you were right there when it happened. And I am literally like, I'm like, that never happened. They're like, oh yeah, no, it used to happen all the time. So there's an example of that resistance, that defiance. And I was just so on overdrive. And the power of, like what you said with your client, when you have more agency, not false agency that I thought I had in that case, but real agency over like being within your body. It's pretty powerful. I mean, look what happened to that client of yours, getting promoted to a bigger role with more impact on the business and on people. And that's the piece that, people like you and I are trying to help leaders find, is that it's go slow to go fast, some of these sayings that I think we say but we don't actually embody. So that was a really useful example to share.
And Carolyn, I think there's two things just to respond to one. So I want to come back to your kiddies telling you that they remembered something that you don't, because goodness, that happens to me a lot, particularly over the last few years. But one point there is, you and I are trying to enable, and many others, by the way, so many others that I'm coming across now, trying to enable and resource people to slow down, to do more, to speed up, or to, sometimes it's speed, sometimes it's do more, sometimes it's have a greater impact. But I think the erroneous assumption is that we want to just throw the baby out with bathwater and just stop. That is something I certainly wouldn't want to. I absolutely love my work. And in fact, I've got tendencies and patterns of sometimes going overboard. And I think, life it's a complex system, isn't it? It's statistical fluctuations, it's ups and downs, but there's got to be some level of regulation in there, and conscious and not controlled, but, yeah, agentic regulation, and having that ability to make choices and being clear about why and when something isn't serving us. So I do think it's important to note that, and because you pretty much said it, but I just wanted to highlight it. But the other thing I wanted to say really quickly is, I think, your whole point about the kids on the fridge and telling you that, you were in overdrive, but you were also having to disconnect from, it's interesting you made this point earlier as well with the yoga, but we, like me, we've had to disconnect, and we've had to numb ourselves from some of what was going on in the moment, whether that was painful or whether that was just, and even those joyful moments, or even, the kids doing something that we haven't even known, because that was what enabled you to get through that. And that dissociation is so important. Yeah. It's a skill. It's actually a survival tactic, but actually noticing it and looking back and seeing what happened and helping others, our kids, as well as those peers around us, to notice that these are some of the things we use to navigate the challenges is critical.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. I had never I'd never really thought about it in those terms, but that's exactly it. I became a master. I became a master at it because you just had to do it to get by. I have one other question. I mean, I think you and I could talk for hours, hours upon hours. There was one other piece that I didn't get to fully in your book, but it really resonated with me. And the chapter was called "Seeing the System." And I know for
Mm.
me, I thought, I was always the tomboy. I hate that term, but I could beat guys on whatever, choose whatever sport through all of into elementary school, even into high school. Once, our bodies started to change, there were still even some kids, some boys that I could beat in sport. And I thought that and competitive, ambitious. And I'm like, I am going to beat the boys at everything. And so my whole mantra became, I'm going to beat anyone who tries to tell me that I can't do it. And what I didn't realize is I was trying to beat people in a system without realizing that there was a system and that there was another choice. And hey, I could just go take my ball and go play in a different system, so to speak. So I'm curious what you have to say about that and how that relates into becoming awakened.
So, gosh, it's a very multifaceted question. And I think obviously I'm picking up some tones around the gender difference being a part of that system, certainly in the stories that you tell. And if you go through that chapter in particular, but actually the rest of the book also picks up on some of these themes. It's standing back and looking at the whole system and noticing the interconnections between various factors in that system, gender being one of them, power being another. And of course, then there's interconnections between gender and power, legitimacy in a corporate context is, who has the legitimacy to either to lead or to get paid more or to have more influence or to possess the most important relationships. And so these are various aspects that I try to highlight in a short chapter, actually. I think there's a whole new book on this, by the way, at some point. But that really helps, I personally feel, it helps me. It certainly helps a lot of the clients that I work with using a systemic lens, using that for, standing back, look at the interrelationships rather than just the entities, the categories that, within any context, whether it's a corporate context, whether it's a school system, whether it's a, hospital. I've worked in a lot of sort of health sector organizations as well. And noticing that some of these interrelationships can be very, very messy, but there is an inherent simplicity in there. And it is incredibly helpful when we can try to decipher some of the outcomes and whether they're good or bad, so desirable or undesirable outcomes that stem from those relationships that live within the system. Now, coming back to your example, having this need to either beat someone at their own game or at a game that whose rules perhaps don't apply to you, it's noticing some of those interrelationships and then having a discussion about it and being able to highlight the fact that there is an impartiality here, that there is a differential here. But I think for so many years we've lived with the implicit rules of the system, or whatever the system, whether it's gender-based, whether it's, in the book I also talk a lot about some of the cross-cultural racial aspects. What are the hidden rules that we don't talk about? And that's where I think the systemic perspective can be actually very healing. One of the big points I bring out in my book is that by taking a step back and looking at the system, noticing the interrelationships, and not saying that there's one particular cause, it takes away something that is a lot easier, which is to blame. And instead, it's more about being curious about why were there different rules to the game, 100, 200, 300 years ago, thousands of years ago. Where did that come from? And was there validity in it? Maybe not. Where are we now? And why are there different conditions that mean that we need to shuffle up the rules of the game, rather than to say the rules of the game were wrong and look how we're a victim to them? That for me is a really important reframe that I think systemic perspectives, frames, and skills really give us. It's such a gift.
Oh, I love the way you've articulated that, because that's sort of the journey that I went on, was to understand sort of the history, and I got curious, and you know, I am gender has been sort of that lens for me. And now going back and understanding some of the history, it certainly has helped me understand, and then given me much more ability to have
Mm.
compassion and empathy and curiosity about the intersectionality that other people have with, different
Mm.
types of their identities.
Yeah.
So there's that agency again. Once I pulled myself out, because I didn't even realize I was sort of coming at it from a victim like perspective. And again, I think all of this circles around to this awakening word, and learning how to really take that agency to stop sleepwalking, sleep running, insert whatever word, conscious, unconscious, but really to
Mm.
allow ourselves to see this other side, and awaken, integrate. I use the word integrate a lot, because our world really is at a state where we're kind of, this probably isn't the most eloquent way of saying it, but we're kind of done with that type of leadership, right? Like we don't want to hear the voice talking at us. We want to be with other people, and we really want us to be seen and heard.
Absolutely. And some of the effects that we're living with now are these fractals that are so fragmented and polarized. And in fact, what you're saying, it's interesting. The word integration was going to be a part of my title, the title of this book as well, by the way. So we're
Oh,
so on the same wave. But integrating and actually just living with and being with, even when we don't like it. Actually, sometimes we need to be with things we don't like and just stay with it. And, it doesn't mean you need to become best friends with it and live with it forever, but it's absolutely the way in which we can make sense and find that integration in a world that needs it so much right now.
oh, yeah. Yeah. Samreen, where could our listeners find out more about your work, your book, any other wonderful things that you're up to?
Oh, well, thank you for asking that question. I'd love for people to become curious and obviously pick up and read the book. There's a website, turmericgroup.com, where within it, there's also a leaderawaken.co.uk website page. It's got loads of articles as well, all relating to the book. And then there's a link where it'll take you to either Amazon or any of the other retailers globally where you can get the book itself. And also, Turmeric Group offers some view as to the kind of work we do in it, one-to-one coaching, team coaching, and a number of other offerings that we have there.
Great. Oh, thank you. We'll make sure to put those links in our show notes. And before we close off, Samrina, I always ask our guests 3 questions. Are you game for those?
Of course I am. Absolutely.
All right. So the first question has to do with self-awareness, which I know we've talked an awful lot about today. Is there a perspective, an anecdote that you can share with us where your self-awareness went to a whole new level? Maybe it wasn't a pleasant experience, maybe it was, but something that just really deepened your self-awareness.
I touched a little bit on this earlier when it came to the shift in how I exercise and look after my body. But I think the bigger frame around that is after my family went through this fairly torturous journey with my son's cancer, I realized that self-awareness goes a hell of a lot deeper than my personality, my what others see in us, the blind spots, everything that, by the way, is fundamental to the work I do with organizations. But there is definitely, I feel like I've been scratching the surface. And I think just to really bring this to life, over the summer, I went to a amazing festival called the Medicine Festival in the UK, and it's held in Reading, in just west of London. And it is a really extraordinary event where leaders from indigenous tribes, wisdom keepers from all over the world come around, and they teach us about how indigenous communities live. and how they look after the environment and how they connect with one another. And I spent 3 days there with my daughter, who's 13. And we went to workshops, and I suddenly realized that there's a whole spiritual level connected to the planet as well as to just that inner connection that you and I have explored today, that I learned from those wisdom keepers that I had no idea existed. And again, I'm sort of being half Venezuelan. I'm thinking, how did I miss that? Coming to 50 and not actually having had much experience of that. So that's a whole level of self-awareness that I am about to tap into.
Wow. Wow. That's amazing. When is that festival? What time of year?
So the festival is held in August. I think the dates next year have been announced, but I don't have them at the top of my head. But it's usually the second or the third week in August. And I'm more than happy to send you a link because it's
Beautiful.
fascinating.
Yes. I think we should put that link in the show notes too. Sounds wonderful. So the
For sure,
second
yeah.
question you sort of answered already, but we'll see if there's some other wisdom in there. And this has to do with a ritual or a practice that you use to help you stay regulated.
Yes. So I've done a lot of breath work recently. So it might be something similar to what you were describing earlier. And it enables me to very quickly over oxygenate my brain, my nervous system, and quite quickly enter into what I would call a state of altered consciousness. And it could be as short as 15, 20 minutes, and it could be as long as an hour and a half. And it's something that I try to do at least once, if not twice a week. And so once a month, I definitely do the long version, but it enables me to just release some of those tensions. And, in a very sort of strange way, it also can help me to release some of the emotions. It is a very strange feeling when you do it. I'm about to go and train in it to become a practitioner in November. But yes, it's become something that really helps, because as soon as I'm done with it, I feel like my nervous system has gone straight into that parasympathetic state and I'm calm. And yeah, it's been very, very helpful.
What's it called, Samreen?
So it's breath work. And there are lots of different
Like
styles.
WRK?
Yes, WORK, yeah, breath work. Yes.
Yeah,
But
cool.
there's deep. I could probably give you more information on it after November, because I will be training in it rather than following someone who's teaching me.
Sounds good. Now, our last question has to do with co-regulation, or really feeling connected to something bigger than yourself. So when we're in that regulated state, we obviously can co-regulate better. And I choose to bring this question to light through music, because I find that music can connect people in a beautiful way. What is a song or genre of music that makes you feel connected to something bigger than yourself?
So it's probably a genre rather than a song. I mean, there's too many, but I love that. Initially, it would have been called the chill out, sort of that, those Ibiza type tunes that use quite sort of world fusion music. But recently, again, coming out of the medicine festival, I've learned that there is a whole genre of indigenous music that uses instruments, and again fuses quite a few instruments and sounds, actual natural sounds. And it reminds me, it's just a sort of, coming back to your word integration, it integrates me at a very, very profound level. I listen to it when I walk the dogs. I really try to force myself. Sometimes I'm always listening to books or podcasts, but I actually now am really trying to, I say the word force myself, it sounds quite strong, but I try to really encourage myself to contemplate and to stop trying to learn and just be. And that music is very integrated.
Wow. I know I've listened to chill. I've on like a playlist, chill music. I'm going to check out medicinal music maybe and see what comes up for that. But some of those like deeper sounds or singing bowls.
Yeah, lovely. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Wow. Samreen, thank you so much for coming on the show. Please thank Judith for reaching out to me. I'm just really so glad to be in connection with you. And I encourage the listeners to please pick up Samreen's book. Hey, 2 for 1. You know what? If you pick up Samreen's book, send me a note and I'll send you a copy of mine as well. I think they're a great combination. Samreen, any last words or things you want to share with the audience?
Well, slow down, breathe, and yes, I think look for the light. It sounds a little bit corny, but it's okay to awaken ourselves even when it can be uncomfortable.
Thank you so much for coming on the show, Samreen. Have a great day. Well, what did you think of that episode? There was something Samreen said, I wrote it down when we were talking, which is living with compromises. And that's my question for you is, what compromises are you living with? What compromises are you leading with? And maybe it's not something you're ready to say out loud, but there's probably a voice that is whispering it inside of you. And I hope through this conversation with Samreen, you have maybe learned to acknowledge those voices. Maybe you've learned a few things to help you articulate those voices. But at the end of the day, I hope you realize the power of leading in life and at work is to accept the other side, the not so good side, and find some way to integration or awakening, as Samreen shared with us. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider listening to more. Also, if you could like and subscribe, even write a review, that would help me out a lot and get this content out to more people. And as always, if you would like to do any work with me or like to learn more about what I do, you can find out more at carolynswora.com. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. We'll see you next time.